Good morning. My name is Alexis Eykel, and I'm the Landlord Engagement Specialist here at Tacoma Housing Authority. And if you're joining us today, you're here most likely to learn about the Rental Housing Code updates. This is a part of a series, and today we're going to be talking about tenant screening. And today our presenters and panelists here are Jim Henderson. Jim is the lobbyist for Rental Housing Association of Washington, NARPM, the National Association of Residential Property Managers, and the owner and operator of Landlord Solutions. And then we have Housing Justice Project as well. And let me just tell you what a special partnership this is and has been since I think 2020. Housing Justice Project and Jim have been doing these webinars and trainings for the community, for tenants and landlords, to help everybody understand the ever-changing landlord-tenant laws. And in this case, the Rental Housing Code has been updated. And then we have Chiquetta Elder with City of Tacoma here as well. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jim.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Alexis, and thank you to you and the Tacoma Housing Authority for putting all of us together and continuing to provide this education for housing providers. And thank you, Chiquetta, for being here and for your support, and for Wyatt and the support that Housing Justice gives to our residents and our community. So together we are learning the changes to the Rental Housing Code that Tacoma passed. And today we're going to talk specifically about the tenant screening section of the code. And then each week we're going to have a new topic that we're going to be discussing related to the changes to the Rental Housing Code. So let's get moving here. Just a disclaimer this morning that the information you're going to receive today is for informational information related to changes to the Rental Housing Code related to the City of Tacoma. These questions, we can't answer specific questions entirely. We can give you general information to try to answer your question, but you will want to seek legal advice specifically to any question. So please today do not consider any of our answers as specific advice to your situation. All right. I want to start by just reminding everybody that what we're going to discuss today is only for property located in the city limits of Tacoma. Okay, this is important to remember, is that you may have a Tacoma address, but you may not be in the city limits of Tacoma. Later on in the slide, there is a link that you can that you would click on, and you would be able to put in the address of your property to verify if it is in fact in the city limits of Tacoma. So today, property located in the city limits of Tacoma. Also, these rules that we're going to talk about today are in addition to everything else that you're doing. These do not replace something you're doing. These are in addition to, okay? All right, so let's get started. These rules are also became effective on July 23rd. So these rules are already in play, and you should be following these rules currently in your screening process. So no longer can you require your applicant to provide a social security number. You can request it, but you cannot require it, okay? If your resident does not want to provide the social security number, and let's say that you have some information in which, let's say it's related to credit report, the applicant, excuse me, can bring you a portable report, and you would have to accept that for the purpose of what you'd be using the social security number for. Okay, so it's important to note here that your resident can provide you an alternative proof of income eligibility, such as a portable screening report or other proof of income. For example, paycheck stubs. Okay, now there may be information in which you get out of a credit report that isn't related only to income. That's something, again, you need to allow them the opportunity to bring you something that's an alternative to that will provide you that information. All right, this is a pretty easy one. I just want to give you some context, just, and this is something in which has been best practice in the tenant screening industry for at least 15 years. And we have educated on this, that the best practice was never to require it. It was always to request it. And it is not uncommon in other parts of our state where, tenant screening happens without a social security number. If we all lived in, on the east side over in like Bellevue or Seattle, it would be fairly more common that we may see applicants that are applying to rent our housing without a social security number because because of the tech industry, they have so many employees that are coming from other countries to work at those companies. So this isn't uncommon, and work with your tenant screening company as to whatever questions you have or concerns you have about this, because you'll probably find that there's not a lot of concern here. All right, kind of a first in the country that I'm aware of is that your applicants, when they come to apply with you, they can designate who will be financially responsible for the lease. So let's say you have a group of applicants and the group wants to designate one person who would be financially responsible. They can do that. And then you would you'd screen that one person for all things that you screen for. The other applicants who are going to be living there, you would screen them differently. These applicants that are not going to be financially responsible would not be financially screened, if you will. You would not need to screen them for source of income. You would not need to screen them for anything related to financial responsibility. That could possibly even include a credit report. Depending on what information you use in a credit report, you may not need to run or credit on somebody who's not financially responsible for the lease. So here's kind of a misconception out there. Sometimes people think that credit reports and criminal records are tied together, and that is not true. Criminal records are public record, and yet they are sourced by name and date of birth. And so criminal records are not in your credit report. You do not need a social security number, or you do not need a credit report to know if somebody has any criminal records. Okay, so that's important to know that. Also, a first is the city has put a cap on your income to rent ratio. So this gets a little confusing. So if you want 3 times the income to rent, then your rent must be below HUD's fair market rent. And if your rent is at or above HUD's fair market rent, you can only require your applicant to show 2.5 times the income to that rent. Okay. Remember, if the resident's on a voucher, or excuse me, the applicant's on a voucher, you're only screening, or you're only doing this 2.5 or 3 times on their portion of the rent. So if the rent's 1,000 and their voucher pays 900, you're only income qualifying them for 100 at the $100 is the amount of rent that they would pay. So it's either, depending on where your rent falls on that fair market rent scale, either 2.5 or 3 times. Another thing, it's one or the other. There's no space in between. There's no 2.75. Okay, so you get to pick either 2.5 or 3 times. Also, there's a website here, and you can Google this as well. But every year, HUD puts out a table of fair market rent based on the size of unit. So I think it starts at a studio and it goes up to a 3-bedroom, and it's by zip code. It doesn't take into account anything special about your unit. It doesn't take into account any amenities, doesn't take into account if it has a hot tub, or if it's a large 3-bedroom versus a small 3-bedroom, by your opinion. It's very basic. Okay, so you're required when setting your income to rent ratio to know what the fair market rent is based on this table. It does, if I'm not mistaken, Alexis, I think it gets republished every October or thereabout. So I would just say every time you go to relist your property, you want to just be in the habit of pulling that, because make sure that you're using the most current income to rent ratio. You will find, and it's quite interesting, you'll find that sometimes the fair market rent is more than what you're asking for. And you will also find that sometimes what you're asking is well above what the fair market rent is for that zip code. All right. Also, if you require a cosigner, and if the cosigner is a friend or family member, you may only require the cosigner to show 3 times the income for the rent that they're cosigning for. I know that that's a new change because in the industry, we typically have asked for more than that. But note now that if the cosigner is a friend or a family member, you're capped at 3 times income for the rent that they're cosigning for. Also, another important change is that the resident has 48 hours to complete, or excuse me, to accept any conditional approval. So if you're requiring additional deposit, a cosigner, the applicant has 48 hours to accept that before you can move on to the next applicant. Okay. So now let's talk about criminal records. The city made a few changes to how we make housing decisions based on the criminal history. So I want to start here by saying that you're all familiar with disparate impact and the analysis that you have to use if you're going to deny a resident, or excuse me, an applicant because of a criminal record. You must also, in addition to this, you must also continue to use disparate impact and determining whether or not you have a legitimate business reason and to deny someone based on the criminal conviction that you are considering. I think it's also important to continue to remember that you're making decisions based on criminal convictions, not on arrests, not on charges. Okay, you're continuing to look at, and your screening company is going to work with you on this. And your screening company is going to give you the information about what they were convicted of versus what they were charged. What somebody is charged with oftentimes is very different than what they actually found guilty of, if found guilty at all. Okay, so a reminder: we're not allowed to have blanket bans. We can't have policies like we don't accept anybody with a felony. That's not legal. Okay, so again, this goes back to disparate impact, where you're required to use the analysis of and before making a decision. You must conduct the individualized assessment, meaning that you must look into what was the age of the person at the time that they convicted the crime, what was the nature of the crime, and then also how much rehab have they done, what has the rehab been, and also how long ago did the crime happen? Did this happen 6 years ago, or did this happen 6 months ago? And again, at the end of that analysis, you still have to have a legitimate business reason, not based in speculation, but an actual reason that allows you to use that record to deny someone. The city of Tacoma added some 4 categories here that you may deny based on a pending charge. And now, I just said we use convictions, but the city of Tacoma is very narrow. Best practice for you is to continue to use convictions and not charges. However, here are the 4, and sex offenses under specific RCW. There are lots of information in this. This is not, a blanket, but it's specific. So again, the individualized assessment is going to lead you back to whether or not, if your resident has a pending charge or a conviction, as to whether you can use those, any one of these 4 as a reason to deny. Okay. Why do you think I covered that? Because I think that I get really nervous and concerned that people will overreach on this, and I just want everyone to continue to use best practices and to really focus on the individualized assessment under HUD's disparate impact guidelines, and then also focusing on convictions. And again, I think when you're using a professional screening company, they're going to help guide you through this process. It's there.
And yeah, Jim, I would just say that you did cover that really well, and I would encourage anyone who has questions about that to actually look at the specific wording of the code, because it is quite specific, and that's why I included the citations there. So it's nested under the social security requirements. That's why it might be a little confusing if you don't have that specific citation available to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, a couple of things that before we go to questions that I want to just make a mention. When we're talking about financial responsibility, you are still allowed, even if the person whom you're screening is not designated as a financially responsible person, you can still do a rental verification for them. You may not, and you can also you can ask about their tenancy with the current and or former landlord as well.